Flying paper and behind George and Matt, there's some back there if need be, but we're going to have some notes that are going to be happening in your notebook, so you will need line paper. I'd say a sheet or two. So you can certainly grab some back there if need be.
Yes.
No.
All right.
Just give me one
For
today or something.
today, last couple of days, you've been working on your essays for Martine, so you have through tonight to submit it. I did change the due date on revision assistant, so you shouldn't get any like red flags coming up with essays later.
No.
Like that. If it does come in, don't worry about that. It's not going to be a big deal. But for tonight, you want to make sure you take care of submitting that. Now, you do also have a short story that you are going to read for tomorrow, and we'll go over page numbers here in a moment. If we have time to start it, but it starts on page 306. So you're on 306, and then it runs through, I believe, 313 is like half a page. So you're taking a look at about 7.5, really, probably 7 pages total with the pictures and stuff that are on there that we're going to read for tomorrow. So the reading and check quiz that we do for tomorrow will be similar to the thing that we did for the land of the slaughter, brief little short answer questions and things like that. For your Martine essays, and I know I said this to you yesterday, but I just want to make sure that people understand. I was going through them earlier in the day, just checking signal checks and all that stuff, and folks are looking pretty good. Keep in mind, though, you're getting graded on 2 parts. There's the signal check grade, but then there's also the simple, the compound, the complex. So if you have 4 paragraphs typed and you have good signal checks, that's okay, but you still want to write that conclusion of that other body paragraph because otherwise you miss out the points for the sentences that you would be writing. So just because the signal check is looking good and you go, hey, I'd be satisfied with the 13 out of 16 or whatever, if you're missing the paragraphs and the sentences, then you can't get graded and scored for the simple, the compound, the complex. I think the most common question about the simple, compound, complex is also, do I need to go in the order that it is in the outline? And the answer for that one is yes, because if you go outside of the order, I can't tell if you know which one is the simple, which one is the compound, which one is the complex. So follow that order that is on the essay problem that you have. Remember, all of those things are on Google Classroom if you need.
Is it alright if for the one question, for the 2 bodies, the one with imagery and the other one, is it okay if we switch it?
Like the symbolism in the imagery? Yes, you can switch those. Yeah, I have no problem with that whatsoever. And like even if, I don't think anyone did this, but even if you switch like the perception ones around a little bit, I wouldn't have an issue with that one. You mean like add sentences to it? I would just keep it as it is because then the same thing happens. Or, you know, which one is meant to be the simple, the compound, the complex, all that kind of stuff. So this essay for some of you is going to be shorter than what you did for the Metamorphosis or Oedipus Rex, and that's perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with that. I know you were typing yours on Google Docs, but you still have to ultimately copy and paste it into Revision Assistant to get that signal check score thing. But if you typing, and I even said this to him yesterday, I know you weren't here, even once you're done with your essay, you probably want to copy and paste it into Google Docs or Word, just to get like the little squiggly marks for like a misspelling or something like that. Because I think for some people, the style and content, or even like the Titan Focus, the score was getting higher when those little things were corrected, because then they could pick up on what you were trying to do. But if you have like 1 submission, 1 signal check on Revision Assistant, and Tommy has 10, that's not held against you or anything like that. Just fix an eye. Okay. Anything else? So, reading check quiz for the story tomorrow. Martine essay for tonight, 11:59, and then that vocab list that you got, we'll take care of for Friday. Moving on my. All right, there we go. Title: And of Clay Are We Created. The author is Isabel Allende is her name. She is from Peru in South America. The story is based on an event that took place in Colombia about 30 years ago, 32 years ago. There was a volcanic eruption that took place in Colombia. High elevations, weather, what happens on really tall mountains?
Oh.
It's cold, and therefore when you look outside, you're going to have snow. So you have this volcanic eruption that occurred. So you have a lot of, obviously, lava, hot temperatures, things like that coming out. What's going to happen to the snow? Initially, it kind of starts to melt, and so what happens is it breaks loose. So now you have an avalanche of snow that is coming down the mountain. As it is coming down the mountain, now the temperatures become warmer, so the snow begins to melt. It starts to turn into water. It's hitting dirt, trees. So basically, it's causing large mudslides that are taking place. So you have a volcanic eruption around snow, or it ends up turning into mudslides. And this is in a pretty rural, isolated, secluded place of Colombia, where it's basically just waves of mud coming down, is destroying whole towns. And the total death count ends up being approximately like 23,000. You'll hear numbers ranging between like 20,000 to 30,000 within Colombia. So essentially, you just have towns that are completely obliterated and covered with mud. It would just look like a huge mud pile, and there'd be parts of buildings left. The mud's coming down at such a high rate velocity that it is destroying the buildings, so they're being leveled. Bridges are certainly being kind of crushed with it. And if you have like a bystander who is standing there, wall of mud comes your way, knocks you over, and then, oh wow, what's going to happen to a person as you are laying down? Essentially, you're getting like smothered, buried, drowning, kind of depending. It could be suffocation taking place, which is still drowning, but you could be kind of like encased in mud. You have people who are not drowning in the mud, but could be in the buildings that are being toppled over and other injuries taking place. So that's a pretty, obviously, when you have 23,000 people, it's a pretty significant disaster. So that is a real life event that occurred. The story that is taking place, it is still a piece of fiction. It's based on those events that happened in 1985. So the names that are getting used, if this were showing up as like a movie or TV show or something like that, it would have the based on true events, but names of characters have changed and all that kind of stuff. The main character who we're going to have is a guy by the name of Rolf, who is a TV reporter that is covering the disaster. The narrator of the story is Rolf's girlfriend. She is not there, but she is watching what is happening by looking at her fiance, her boyfriend, on TV covering this disaster that's taking place. So main character Rolf, narrator not present, but narrator is describing everything that she sees coming through the TV screen. The main conflict then is Rolf has his duties are certainly to cover what's happening, but then there is a girl who is trapped by the name of Azucena. She is trapped in the mud, and essentially he abandons his duties to look after her. Her name has been changed, but she is based on a real-life 13-year-old girl who's also trapped in mud in the event that's taking place within Colombia. Got all this, Tommy? Sort of. A lot of stuff coming your way.
Yeah.
At least it's not an avalanche of mud coming your way.
That's just this.
Oh, can you back up?
Yeah. There's going to be description of Azucena and her kind of being trapped. The situation would be she is in debris, which is basically causing a mud pit, and she is holding on. I'm going to get to you here in a second. She is holding on to debris to kind of keep her head above water. So you have like water, mud, pretty much up to about her neck area, and then it is slowly kind of increasing. So there's a struggle to try to get pumped to get the water, mud out of there so they can start to free her. But her legs, her body would be trapped with debris, cement, metal, wood, all that kind of stuff is kind of keeping her in place. So, story you're going to read, and then there's a newspaper article that comes after it, which we are going to read, but for tomorrow, all I need you to read is the short story. So the short story ends on page 313. There's a newspaper article on page 315 that we're going to take a look at later on. But both versions are covering the same event, but we have two different genres that we're taking a look at here. So we have the short story, the first thing that we're going to have, piece of fiction, and then we have the newspaper article, the nonfiction, that's going to be covering the same idea. The two main elements of focus that we're going to be looking at here with these kind of background notes, same way we were looking at situational irony and dramatic irony with Lamb to the Slaughter, and tone and mood with The Pedestrian, is we're taking a look at the genre and also the theme, so kind of like the approaches that writers have. So we're going to have a fictional account of this event, and then we're also going to have a non-fiction account of the event with the newspaper, and these are employing two different types of writing, subjective and objective writing. Do you know the difference between subjective and objective writing?
Subject is how the author feels.
About halfway there.
Oh, for real?
Pretty close. Subjective writing tends to be personal. So when you have subjective writing, and certainly you want to hit these bullet points here, writers emphasize or share their own personal feelings, thoughts, judgments, opinions within their writing. Otherwise, Devin gets to start picking. I'd say Zach, but I know he definitely would pick you. What would be types of things where people have personal emotions coming through their writing? Whether it be types of writing that you've done or types of writing that we're certainly still aware of. Personal emotions.
You mean like diary?
Diary would be one.
Diary.
And so this doesn't mean that it's something that you're necessarily going to write to share with people. You don't have to go dear diary, meaning English class with period. This is my thoughts and feelings for the day. But a diary, a journal could be something that's very subjective. People, let's say, who write poetry, or some people who are songwriters, you tend to have emotions that will kind of come across with those things. Mrs. Perry next door teaches creative writing, which some of you might end up taking, where you write short stories and poems and things like that, plays, and your own feelings and thoughts and all that kind of stuff can come across within them. So it tends to be something like diaries, stories. Within newspapers, we tend to think of that as not being subjective, where you're just reporting the facts, but there's a section in newspapers where people share opinions, editorials, things like that. So those can have thoughts and feelings coming across.
The most subjective writing is bias.
If it is writing it can be. So yes, and bias being one of those terms. Remember, bias is you have like a predisposed feeling about an issue. So if you are taking something that is very controversial, there's probably going to be some biases that are coming across. In my 7th period class, they're looking at an assignment where they have to argue, is college worth the cost? So is going to college worth the price that you have to pay? Some are going to say yes, some are going to say no. There's a variety of sources that they have to look at. One of the sources is written by a college president. What do you think the college president has to say? It is worth the cost, it's the best thing that you could do in your life, and there would certainly be some bias that's coming through. Now, he could absolutely believe that. He could also be trying to recruit people to attend his school so that Tyler then pays tuition, and then they have more money coming in. So they certainly can have bias. If you're writing a song, if you're writing a poem, if you're writing in your journal, you're not writing about an issue, there's not really going to be that bias, there. But if you're dealing with, should you build a wall around the United States at the border, those would be things where you're probably going to have bias coming across. Political party affiliation can be bias. If you are raised in a house of Republicans, you're probably going to have Republican bias. If you're raised in a family of Democrats, you're probably going to have Democratic bias. So places where it could certainly be found, works of fiction, personal essays, and I don't mean personal essays like writing about Martine or Oedipus Rex and things like that, but people could be writing personal essays about issues. Could be an autobiography, you writing about yourself and the significance of life, and then mention that editorial section in newspapers, journalists, and readers express their views and opinions on news events. If you did have an essay assignment in class where do you think there should be mandatory military service for all people 18 to 25 in the United States, there could be some bias that would come across in that. Well, I'm not saying that you would serve, like some countries, I think Finland does it, where
Yeah.
you don't have to serve all 7 years, but you, between the ages, and I don't know if it's 18 or 25 or 18 and 30, but between those ages you have to fulfill a military service requirement. Doesn't mean you're serving all 7 years.
4 to 73.
What is it? From age 4 to 73? Tommy, military service requirement? Yes or no?
I'll make 25.
Ben says no.
I agree.
Why not?
25 is a bit excessive.
Rooted in the population.
I just think some people.
So if a person were to go, well, by the time I'm 25, say those were the numbers, I'm hoping to accomplish this, and military service isn't one of those things, those would be some personal biases that are coming across. Keep in mind, biases does not mean that they're bad, but it's just something to kind of take into consideration.
I agree.
Objective writing is the opposite of subjective, where you are only presenting facts. So, not going to work. If you are only presenting information, this is going to be objective. So you don't have the writer's beliefs or feelings coming across. You simply are just presenting what happened. So there was a volcanic eruption in Colombia in 1985. The eruption caused an avalanche, which led to a mudslide. 23,000 people were killed. That would be objective writing.
That was a year after my dad.
So this is
1984.
I think this is
Math. 1980.
You said young.
If we were to take that same idea in 1985, a horrific disaster occurred in Colombia when a volcanic eruption caused a mudslide that terrorized thousands of people, and there were 23,000 innocent victims. You're still reporting what happened, but by me using words like horrific, innocent, devastating, now it's becoming subjective, where I have thoughts and feelings starting to come across.
the volcano didn't do anything to him, like the lava didn't get him.
No, because for a lot, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a lot of volcanic eruptions, it's not like that. What you think of like oozing lava and all that stuff coming out, it tends to be the ash that causes more difficulty. But for this part, it was really like the heat of what's coming out of the earth causing the snow to break loose and like the shaking of it. But there's probably not going to be a lot of volcanic eruptions where you have people being burned alive with the lava and all that kind of stuff. The ash can cause a lot of difficulty and things like that.
It's not like Dante's Peak.
No.
Like
Objective writing. So journalists who report the news write in that objective style. They're sticking to the facts and the figures of the events that they report. Their purpose is strictly to inform readers. So for the most part, things like textbooks would be objective writing. Newspaper articles are meant to be objective writing. And more often than not, that objective writing tends to be nonfiction. Now, are there newspapers, are there news stations that have, when Luke mentioned bias? Absolutely. When it comes to news, people will tend to look at CNN, MSNBC as being more liberal or democratic. Fox News, folks will look at being more Republican or conservative. So you could have both news stations, or all three news stations, covering the same story, and the way the information is presented could be a little different.
I'm not seeing it, man. It's
Well, the idea would be that if it is more liberal Democrat, it's going to be more critical of Republican, like you have with President Trump. whereas Fox News is going to be not necessarily always defending, but looking more in that pro. So if you were a Democrat and you watch Fox News all the time, or you're a Republican and you watch CNN all the time, you tend to have viewers who are going to be getting kind of upset. Now, news stations or just TV stations like PBS, they tend to be more in the middle, neutral, objective, just kind of reporting the facts. The big newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, tend to be more in the middle, objective. AndOfClay we created, mentioned to you, Allende is creating a realistic story. So she's writing about something that happened, but since she is writing a realistic story, but focus on story and moving, there's a lot of emotions. She's kind of combining these elements of fiction and nonfiction, and in this case, it's going to be very subjective. So it is fiction in the sense that you have characters, the setting, and there is a theme which she's able to play with. The nonfiction is she kind of brings in some facts from those real events and weaves it into the story that's taking place. But when she gets into specific names, when she's talking about Rolf the reporter and whatnot, all of those things would be fictional elements that she is adding. As you read the two accounts, and the two accounts being the short story versus the newspaper article, for tomorrow, again, we're only worried about the short story. I want you to compare and contrast a few things, and I'll certainly kind of lead you into this. How do they portray events? How do they portray people, setting, tone, style, and details? When you have the subjective writing, certainly more of those emotions, more of those like charged words are going to be coming in. When you're dealing with the objective, more focus on the details, especially numbers, those kinds of facts, whereas a fictional writing is going to be looking at tone, kind of creating their characters to shape a certain message that they want to come across. A term that we use a good bit, but we haven't really gone into a whole lot of detail yet, is going to be theme. So theme is going to be the central idea or insight about life that you're looking for in a work of literature. Theme can do a couple different things. You could have conveying an important message or reveal a person's purpose with their writing. For this one, it's certainly going to do both. You're dealing with a tragic event that is taking place. So the theme doesn't necessarily mean that bad things are going to happen to you, but what could be some messages about tragic events? In times of tragedy, you can kind of find out what people are made of or willing to do. Deal with, are folks willing to sacrifice themselves to help others? That there are tragedies that are inevitable. You can't really do anything to stop a volcanic reaction, eruption, excuse me, not reaction. But you can certainly do things as to how you're able to respond to those situations or maybe deal with some tragedies that would kind of be happening with it. Purpose of writing usually breaks down into just three categories, which we're going to get into here in a moment. What I want you to keep an eye on as we go through the characters, and Rolf is going to be the main character for this one, is how does he kind of end up changing? If he is a newspaper, excuse me, not newspaper, if he is a TV reporter, what is his job description?
To report the news that's happening. That's his job.
I understood reporting, and after that, you lost me.
The news that's happening.
Happening.
Habits.
ING.
It's the hats.
Shai had a good day yesterday.
Report the news that's happening.
She enjoyed her personal space.
English.
All those
She
things.
was.
She was not here. His nose just grew. If he is TV reporter, his job is to simply report the facts. Now, what happens is you have tragedy, so you see people struggling, especially when you see children struggling, you probably are going to have more of an emotional reaction to it. So part of the change that's going to take place for him is how is he able to react to the situation, recognizing who victims are and whatnot. So as the character begins to change, as the conflict starts to be resolved, And as the struggles of the main character occur, you start to see a more universal problem or situation. And this is the tricky part with theme. When it comes to theme, it's not just going, okay, this is a lesson that I could learn if I was involved in a volcanic eruption, but how does what has happened in this story, how can it be applied to the majority of readers? Once you can figure that out, then you have a theme taken care of. So that's going to be a big issue that we're going to look at. Mentioned to you main purposes of writing. The three main purposes are to inform, to persuade, and to entertain. Doesn't mean you solely just do one of those three.
What's that called? Whenever a character changes when
If a dynamic character is a character who changes, where a static character is a character who remains the same. You also have two other types of characters are round and flat. Flat character meaning they only represent like one idea. You could have a round character that is more developed, but if the round character does not change, they can still be a static character. Gregor's parents would be static characters for the most part, especially his father, where there's not a whole lot of change that takes place in him. You could say Greta changes, going from like caretaker to being an anti-Gregor by the way.
Yeah, but his father,
Well, it doesn't mean that you're going to go from inaction to action, but he never seems to have like a positive viewpoint of Gregor, so that part kind of remains.
so yeah, alright. Is it more about like feelings instead of actions whenever it's not talking about dynamic stuff?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like attitudes.
Yeah.
With feelings. No, you could have static characters who do stuff. Like you could movie book, comic book. You could have a villain who does a lot of terrible things. If he only or she only does terrible things, static character. What's it mean to inform? Presenting information. Where if you are trying to persuade, there's still probably going to be some information, but you want to convince, change your viewpoint. So I'm going, you should have mandatory military service. Ben is saying, no, you should not. He's going to try to persuade me by presenting how. And entertain, certainly that element of entertaining, trying to make something happy, enjoyable. So a writer could have several purposes, but generally there's going to be one that becomes the main focus. You could have a newspaper editorial about a political election. It could certainly be informing readers about the issue. It could be written in an entertaining style, but if it's an editorial, ultimately it's going to be meant to persuade. You could have a short story, as we do, that could inform you about a natural disaster, that maybe could persuade you about ways that you should handle things, but ultimately it is looking to entertain. Now, entertain doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you're looking for happy endings. Oedipus Rex Metamorphosis does not have happy endings, but the argument would be you're still trying to get an emotional reaction from a person, and therefore it's going to be entertainment. I would say generally you probably get at least a combination of two of them, if not all three. So, while reading the story, consider Allende's purpose for writing a fictional story about a real event. You want to ask yourself a few questions. Why would she write about something that did happen that she's not directly involved in, and what does she want us to think about it? That's going to give you your better idea as to what's her overall purpose with it. But with it being a short story, it's definitely going to be subjective writing. I don't need you to write down answers for this one within your notebook. Couple questions. Are people helpless when a natural disaster hits? And then do you think most people would risk their lives to try to save a stranger? Those will be things that we'll kind of talk about coming up as we go over some things with the story. Since we got 10 minutes, let's open up to 306. At least give you a head start with the story. Maybe clarify a couple issues that could be slightly confusing. On Google Classroom, I did put an audio version of the text, so if it's something that you want to listen to while maybe you're finishing up an essay on revision assistant, you would be able to do that. I will say the reader of the text was sitting a little too close to their microphone.
Oh, it's like a smooth jazz.
Well, no, whenever they say like a P sound, you get the hard kind of sounds.
Unless it's Neil
Well,
deGrasse
not
Tyson,
E.
I'm not listening.
What time is it? I mean, what page are we on?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
306.
There's a-
So on page 305, that is your title page. AndOfClay we created, and then 306 is when the actual story is.
That was scared the shit out of this film.
Not meant to be a stupid question. What is clay?
What? That's a type of dirt.
Dirt,
It's a
mud,
mixture of dirt.
natural resource, and things like that. You know you're dealing with a character who is going to be trapped in mud. AndOfClay we created, so she's in a situation where she's sinking back into the substance where some folks would argue we're all part of the earth we're coming from. It's, so there's certainly a little bit of irony that would be taking place there. Alright, so 306 at the top. They discovered the girl's head protruding. Ooh, vocab word from a couple of weeks ago. What does it mean?
Is that how it's
It's sticking out, so her head is sticking out from the mud pit. Eyes wide open, calling soundlessly. She had a first communion name, Azucena Lily. So her name is Spanish for Lily. Certainly with Martine, you're taking a look at imagery, symbolism. I would say there's some symbolism taking place with her name because her head is protruding or sticking out from the earth. Lily is, of course, a flower, so there's some similarities that would be happening there. In that vast cemetery where the odor of death was already attracting vultures from far away, and where the weeping of orphans and the wails of the injured filled the air, the little girl, obstinately clinging to life, became the symbol of the tragedy. The television cameras transmitted so often the unbearable image of the head budding like a black squash from clay that there was no one who did not recognize her and know her name. And every time we saw her on the screen, right before or right behind her was Ralph Carlet, who had gone there on assignment, never suspecting that he would find a fragment of his past lost 30 years before. That's an important line to consider, who had gone there on an assignment, never suspecting that he would find a fragment of his past lost 30 years before. That idea is going to represent itself. First, a subterranean sob rocked the cotton fields, hurling them like waves of foam. Geologists had set up their seismographs weeks before and knew that the mountain had awakened again. But for some time they had predicted that the heart of the eruption would detach the external ice from the slopes of the volcano, but no one heeded their warnings. They sounded like the tales of frightened old women. The towns in the valley went about their daily life, deaf to the moaning of the earth, until that fateful Wednesday night in November, when a prolonged roar announced the end of the world, and walls of snow broke loose, rolling in an avalanche of clay, stones, and water that descended on the villages and buried them beneath unfathomable meters of telluric vomit. As soon as the survivors emerged from the paralysis of that first awful terror, they could see that houses, plazas, churches, white cotton plantations, dark coffee forests, cattle pastures, all had disappeared. Much later, after soldiers and volunteers had arrived to rescue the living and try to assess the magnitude of the cataclysm, it was calculated that beneath the mud lay more than 20,000 human beings and an indefinite number of animals putrefying in the viscous soup. Forest and rivers had also been swept away, and there was nothing to be seen but an immense desert of mire. When the station called before dawn, Ralph Carlet and I were together. I crawled out of bed, dazed with sleep, and went to prepare coffee while he hurriedly dressed. He stuffed his gear in the green canvas backpack he always carried, and we said goodbye, as we had so many times before. I had no presentiments. I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and planning the long hours without him, sure that he would be back the next day. He was one of the first to reach the scene because while other reporters were fighting their way to the edges of the morass in jeeps, bicycles, or on foot, each getting there however he could, Ralph Carlet had the advantage of a television helicopter which flew him over the avalanche. We watched on our screens, so keep this in mind, your narrator's watching this unfold. We watched on our screens the footage captured by his assistant's camera in which he was up to his knees in muck, a microphone in his hand, in the midst of a bedlam of lost children, wounded survivors, corpses, and devastation. The story came to us in his calm voice. For years he had been a familiar figure in newscasts, arrive at the scene of battles and catastrophes with awesome tenacity. Nothing could stop him, and I was always amazed at his equanimity in the face of danger and suffering. It seemed as if nothing could shake his fortitude or deter his curiosity. Fear seemed never to touch him, although he had confessed to me that he was not a courageous man, far from it. I believe that the lens of the camera had a strange effect on him. It was as if it transported him into a different time from which he could watch events without actually participating in them. When I knew him better, I came to realize that this fictive distance seemed to protect him from his own emotions. So, you got a TV camera or a recorder camera, you're looking at events unfolding, you almost have a little bit of a barrier that you're not actually experiencing it, but you're still kind of seeing it on your own kind of mini newscast. And even holding up a phone in some ways could be like that, where you still see it unfolding on the screen. It's not like you're participating or experiencing it in the same way. Ralph Carley was in on the story of Azucena from the beginning. He filmed the volunteers who discovered her and the first persons who tried to reach her. His camera zoomed in on the girl, her dark face, her large, desolate eyes, the plastered down tangle of her hair. The mud was like quicksand around her, and anyone attempting to reach her was in danger of sinking. They threw a rope to her, and she made no effort to grasp until they shouted to her to catch it. Then she pulled a hand from the mire and tried to move, but immediately sank a little deeper. Ralph threw down his knapsack and the rest of his equipment and waded into the quagmire, commenting from his assistant's microphone that it was cold and that one could begin to smell the stench of corpses. "What's your name?" he asked the girl, and she told him her flower name. "Don't move, Azucena," Ralph Carley directed, and kept talking to her without a thought of what he was saying, just to distract her, while slowly he worked his way forward in mud up to his waist. The air around him seemed as murky as the mud. It was impossible to reach her from the approach he was attempting, so he retreated and circled around where there seemed to be firmer footing. When he was finally close enough, he took the rope and tied it beneath her arm so that he could pull her out. He smiled at her with that smile that crinkles his eyes and makes him look like a little boy. He told her that everything was fine, that he was with her now, soon they would have her out. He signaled the others to pull, but as soon as the cord tensed, the girl screamed. They tried again, and her shoulders and arms appeared, but they could move her no farther. She was trapped. Someone suggested that her legs might be caught in the collapsed walls of her house, but she said it was not just rubble, that she was also held by the bodies of her brothers and sisters clinging to her legs. "Don't worry, we'll get you out of there," Rolf promised. Despite the quality of the transmission, I could hear his voice break, and I loved him more than ever. Azucena looked at him, but said nothing. Stop there. So, you got half of 308 going to 313, 2-page flips. You can do it. Martine essays, double check, make sure spelling and things like that are good to go, because that could have an impact with the style of the organization, and then certainly double check over your sentence structure to make sure they're okay. If you're unsure about what a sentence is, send me an email or shoot me a remind text, and I can try to get back to you.
So full.